Welcome to Book Time with Ryan. I am Ryan, and today I'll be talking about The Gales of November by John U. Bacon. There we go. Now it's in focus. This is the untold story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. This is a true story. This is nonfiction, and what a treat. I've known of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Legendary, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. But I knew of, okay? But I didn't know much about it. And this is on the Great Lakes of the United States, specifically Lake Superior. I have to say I lived on, or very close to Lake Ontario. So I've experienced some of the Great Lakes stuff, but not out on the Great Lakes, just on the shores. We live near the Erie Canal too, and born in Pittsburgh. I'm wearing my Pittsburgh Pirates jacket, even though it's the playoffs and they're, of course, eliminated from the playoffs, because a lot of what has made Pittsburgh what Pittsburgh is or has been came through this kind of life cycle on the Great Lakes, and specifically a lot of the raw materials that built steel, that was incorporated into steel. So that's why I'm wearing the pirate shirt. Also, the chief engineer of the Edmund Fitzgerald was from the Pittsburgh area. And I just have to assume that he was a Pirates fan, especially in the time period that we're looking at, because that's when they were really good. So, I got the Gales of November a little over a week ago, and the author, John U. Bacon, was speaking at Politics and Prose. Politics and Prose. In Washington, D.C., and I don't have work right now, so I decided to drive on down to Washington, D.C., an hour and a half from where I live. Although it was only 45 minutes back, that just shows you how much traffic influences what happens in this area. And I was able to get my book signed by John. Here's random pages that I'm looking for a signature. There it is. Yay. I like this cover. I kind of ruined the back of it with water. I took it to the pool. I just joined the club. But it's kind of metallic, the finish. And it's an illustration of the Edmund Fitzgerald in that storm on November 9th, 10th, and 11th of 1975. Spoiler alert, the Edmund Fitzgerald goes down. Everyone dies. And this is a very different story than a lot of the other maritime nautical disaster stories that I've read, because we know where it is. They found it relatively quickly once it sank, and they've been able to go down and look at it. It's in 530 feet of water, but we don't know exactly what happened, and that's what's still interesting. So we know kind of the lead up to it. One of the interesting things was a cousin ship of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the Arthur Anderson. I think it's Arthur M. Anderson, not the accounting firm, the late accounting firm. A former president of U.S. Steel, was really about an hour and a half-ish behind them when this was going on. So not only were they in touch with and following the Edmund Fitzgerald for a lot of this trip, they were also experiencing the same kinds of seas. So that gives us a little idea of, or not a little idea, it gives us a pretty good idea of what it was experiencing outside of what was actually happening on the ship. Now, these ships are very interesting to me and very different than everything else I've read. I think it's important to know in a lot of the disaster books that I've read, sea disasters, it's either really old, which then it's just dangerous anyway, like 1700s, 1600s, just old shipping, very dangerous. We look at some of the kind of freighters or tankers or container ships that have been lost in my playlist of nautical and maritime books. And a lot of times those ships are lost also in storms, but because they're poorly maintained and companies are cutting corners and just poor crews and poor leadership and poor direction from the companies. And I think the company in this situation did a pretty poor job of following up after the accident. But the reality was the Edmund Fitzgerald was it was the star of the Great Lakes. And it was built in the late 60s. It was 18 years old when it, no wait, yeah. 50? Late 50s, yes. I think 58. It was not an old ship, and although it probably still be running now, but at the time it was not an old ship. It was really kind of the class. It was the star of the Great Lakes. It was 729 feet long, very narrow. Now, this is the interesting about Great Lake freighters. They were really built to fit to the maximum dimensions of the locks, specifically the Sault Ste. Marie locks, the Soo locks in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, Ontario. And those locks really let in anything below, at the time, 730 feet. So they did 729 feet for the length and fairly narrow. This is a 10-to-1 ratio ship, 10-to-1 length to width, which means that it's very long and very narrow. And what you see on what they call salties, the ships that are at sea out on the oceans, shorter, wider. So firmer base for riding in rough seas. I would have thought that there wasn't a huge difference in sea states with the Great Lakes and the oceans. Ocean, bigger, just there's more going on there. What I didn't realize, and was really interesting, I thought, especially early on in this book, is talking about how the freshwater conditions affect the sea state in the Great Lakes. And this is a lot of fresh water. One of the things they talk about is if you took all of the water in the 5 Great Lakes, Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, that's the order on the way out to the St. Lawrence Seaway. If you took all of that water, you could cover the entire landmass of North and South America in 1 foot of water. The entire landmass. It's something like 80% of fresh water in the U.S. is contained within the Great Lakes, and 20% of worldwide fresh water is contained within the Great Lakes. I think. That's crazy. That is a crazy amount of fresh water. But the interesting thing with the sea state is the salt content in the oceans actually helps lay down waves because it's denser and more buoyant. The waves can be large still, but they are smoother. Like instead of being like this because it's heavier, maybe it's more like this. It could still be 100 feet, but it's 100 feet. Where the Great Lakes, because of the freshwater situation there, the waves are very steep. And so they're like this. And they are more frequent. They're actually twice as fast or more frequent than the waves of Pacific or the Atlantic and the oceans, which means that these long, narrow ships could be floating on the peak of 2 different waves, the crest of 2 different waves, and in between them have this dropped off area, and the ship can actually bend down a little bit like this, called a sag. And then this is called hogging, sagging and hogging. If this is the opposite, the waves here, and then it has 2 areas where it's dropped off. Those extreme steep wave systems are kind of wreak havoc on these ships, but the ships are also designed to be a little more bendy, a little more flexible. And you have people that have experienced these ships where they'll walk down, they have these tunnels just under the deck, so you don't have to walk outside in the weather, and you can't see the ends of the tunnels because the ship moves so much that if you were looking straight down the tunnel and you expect to see like this end and this end, it's actually like this. So you can't see this end because you're over here and it's bending. Eventually that takes a toll on the hull. That's like bending a paperclip. Just keep bending it, and you lose some of that strength. The other thing is, so this is the class of ship. Also the crew, the captain. This is considered the best captain on the Great Lakes. The crew, because of how nice the ship was, how well maintained the ship was, how it was a class of its own with the food and the VIP quarters and the crew quarters and the area for the officers. This is a ship that people wanted to be on. And because of that, they were able to attract really good crew. And the crew really got along. This is one of those examples of a ship that was just the best ship on the Great Lakes with the best crew and the best captain in a horrible situation in a time period that I don't think can appreciate now. Why? This is not way back. This is 1975, but this is pre-GPS that we experience today. And I think they were probably using Loran, right? But they don't ever mention Loran in the book, or John Bacon doesn't ever mention Loran in the book. They're using paper charts. They have some experience with different kinds of radar. There's long and short range radar on the ship. There are some safety tools that we would experience or expect today. For instance, having some kind of alarm for certain spaces in the ship, that if they fill up with water, have any kind of leakage, that there's going to be some kind of alarm that goes off. They don't have that. There are pumps, but the pumps may not work if the ship's at a certain angle. It is at this point, it would be an old ship, although ships as old as Edmund Fitzgerald are still running on the Great Lakes. But it's got a lot of the stuff going for it that you would expect. It's also it's in a time period where the iron ore that's mined north of the Great Lakes and then shipped through the Great Lakes and through the different areas on the way either to kind of the Rust Belt, the areas that are building cars or machinery or steel. They've shifted from iron ore to taconite, which is once they kind of got done really burning through the iron ore supply, they found sedimentary rock that has iron parts, and they were able to kind of mix that to then take advantage of that supply of iron in taconite. So we have a ship that's loaded up with 26,000 long tons of taconite. Little freeboard. I think it's maybe 10 feet of freeboard. The amount of ship between the water line and the deck. So you have about 10 feet. They are seeing some monster waves. This is a system that came from Canada on one part and Southern California another. Two different systems that are sprinting towards the Great Lakes. The system for weather and communication is a little different, a little more rudimentary back then. And they're getting maybe 1 or 2 reports a day. And those reports lag a little bit too from the National Weather Service. There's also, some Coast Guard coverage. There is an icebreaker Mackinac on the Great Lakes and other ships. Actually, I knew some of the commanding officers of the new Mackinac. Here's the coin of the new Mac. Pretty cool. Why is this not focused? Is it focusing yet? There we go. The Mackinac. And also the outgoing District 9 commander, a 2-star admiral. And this is his coin for District 9, the Great Lakes. So there are the Great Lakes, and there's 2 stars, and pretty sweet looking coin, Guardians of the Great Lakes. This is a interesting book that does not reflect well on parts of the Coast Guard, specifically Group Sault Ste. Marie. Now Sector, I think it's still a Sector Sault Ste. Marie. They changed the name and they've kind of changed command structures of some of these areas when I was still in. So they went from groups to sectors. And the Watchstander really dropped the ball the night of the disaster. So what we're seeing is the Edmund Fitzgerald is loading up with taconite on the head of the Great Lakes, which is really towards Duluth and Superior, Duluth, Minnesota, Superior, Wisconsin. What's it called? 2 Lakes or something. There's actually a map. I guess I should just pull that out. Here are the Great Lakes. All right, so they're starting up here. This is actually the line. They were supposed to go down through the locks down here and go through eventually to Toledo and Cleveland. And then they were going to close up for the winter, probably to go into the yard. This is Lake Superior. So starting at Superior, Wisconsin. What they ended up doing is the storm was going to, there's a thing called fetch, which is how much the waves can build up on the lake. And not surprising, weather is typically moving west to east. So it's hitting the head of lakes, that farther west end of Lake Superior. And those waves are building across 350 miles until you get to the other end of Lake Superior. These ships are typically loading up on supplies taconite at the head of the lakes, which might be Duluth, Minnesota, Superior, Wisconsin. Two harbors are Silver Bay, Minnesota. And they would typically go across, straight across, and then head towards Whitefish Point or go after Kennesaw Peninsula and then down to Whitefish Point and into Whitefish Bay. And then they're the Sioux Locks, and they would start their process to go down towards Lake Huron and eventually to Cleveland or to Toledo or Detroit. What happened here was they knew that there was weather coming. I don't think they knew how bad it was. So the Edmund Fitzgerald decided to head north and try to find a lee behind Isle Royale and eventually Michipicochican Island. Yeah, I pronounced that right. And then Caribou Island. And the idea was that if they stuck closer to the northern part of the lake, that they would have more of a lee, less of an area that the weather would be building up. And what they didn't know was that, well, I guess they probably did know it, but they're by taking that northern route, they're adding 14 hours onto the transit. And what they didn't know was that by adding 14 hours on the transit, they're giving the storm more time to catch up and really meet them at Whitefish Point and Whitefish Bay. If they just gone straight across, they would have been having following seas, rough seas, but they would have gotten there 14 hours earlier, and it would have been rough, but it would have been different. By going north, momentarily, maybe they feel better, but by the time they turn south and start heading towards Whitefish Point, by the time they turn south and go towards Whitefish Point, the storm's caught up with them. So they're actually going straight towards the storm, and now they're taking all the fetch, 350 miles of building up seas, and they're taking that broadside. As they're going south, they're taking this on their starboard side, which is rough. If the storm had gotten there much, much sooner or had really stayed back, maybe it would have been okay. But a couple things happen with this. Not only are they timing it differently, but also McSorley, the captain, is going into an area that he's not as experienced with. Still experienced, but not as experienced as his typical route that he's done thousands of times. Behind him is the Arthur Anderson, another similar ship, a little bit larger, that's coming up behind them. And at one point they're within a mile of each other, 2 miles, and they're kind of heading off. But the Edmund Fitzgerald speeds up and kind of puts some distance between them. At some point, stuff happens and it starts going south. And here's where some of the guessing begins, although it's educated guessing. This is not a time period where ships are being followed on electronic systems, plotting systems, or anything like that. So we have an idea of where the Edmund Fitzgerald was because the Arthur Anderson was with it, and they had it on radar, so they could kind of keep track of it. Eventually, there's a whiteout situation as the storms come in, and it just starts dropping snow, and they lose a lot of visibility. And there's a report from the Edmund Fitzgerald that they have had some damage because of waves on a vent cover, 2 vent covers maybe, and a railing on the outside, and they have a slight list. And just to disclose anything over the radio is considered a big deal because a lot of people want to keep their cards close to their vest. So there's some concern, but also the way it's framed, it doesn't seem like the ship's really extremely worried about it. At some point, they lose their radar, long range and short range radar, and they lose direction finding radio, which they would be able to use for the Whitefish Point lighthouse, which also has an electronic beacon, which can be used to navigate. So not only do they have reduced visibility, horrible 30-foot seas broadside. They've lost their radar. They don't have a way to navigate visually. They don't have a way to navigate electronically. They're getting some updates from the Arthur Anderson, but the Arthur Anderson's also having trouble seeing them and dealing with some pretty rough states themselves. Eventually, the Edmund Fitzgerald goes towards the Caribou Island point, which they should have avoided. There's no reason they should have gone close to that. And they get close to something called six fathom shoals. A fathom is 6 feet, so 36 feet. But there are actually areas that are 10 feet. And with the kind of draft that they're pulling with a fully loaded 26,000 long ton shipment, it's a little bit more than 26,000 long tons, this would be a very dangerous place for them to be. There's no reason for them to be close to it. They don't gain anything from being close to the island or from the 6 fathom shoals. And it's not clear why they did that. Arthur Anderson steers clear of 6 fathom shoals and the island. But there's still about, I don't know, there's a few more hours left before the Edmund Fitzgerald disappears. They're about an hour or a little less now ahead of the Arthur Anderson. They slow down to give the Arthur Anderson some time to catch up because now they're starting to get worried. You can tell that they're starting to get worried. At some point, there's yelling on the radio. Captain McSorley radios in to say that they have a bad list and some other stuff's going on. There's some yelling. He says they're keeping it together. And now Arthur Anderson's should be within visual range, but all of a sudden they lose visibility. And they also lose radar contact with the Edmund Fitzgerald. They don't know where the Edmund Fitzgerald went. They wouldn't be surprised if the Edmund Fitzgerald lost power and just lost the navigational lights, or maybe it went down, and that's the scary thing for them. So they're trying to raise the Edmund Fitzgerald. They reach out to Coast Guard Group Sault Ste. Marie, Group Sioux. Group Sioux's watchtender's doing a pretty bad job at taking this seriously, and is kind of dismissive, it seems like. I don't know why. It's embarrassing. Would it have changed anything? I don't know. There's not a whole lot of time. This is a very cold lake, really rough situation, and Coast Guard assets in that area are slim pickings, and it's a wide area, so it's not like things happen immediately anyway. But it's like hindsight. This watchtender should have taken it seriously, and when they eventually did take it seriously and notified the command back in Cleveland, I think they immediately launched aircraft from Traverse City, Air Station Traverse City. I think they should have, but we don't know what happened. So Arthur Anderson continues on looking for things that really, within an hour of losing, or a couple hours of losing the Edmund Fitzgerald, the conditions start to ease up a little bit. They make it to Whitefish Bay. We're talking about the Arthur Anderson. They get ready to go through the locks, and then the Coast Guard asks them to turn around and go back and look for the Edmund Fitzgerald. Still rough out and dangerous, but they agree to go do that. There are a number of other ships that also do. There are also some ships that refuse to, which is fairly cowardly and not like a lot of ships, but they don't find anything immediate. Certainly not survivors. Eventually they find debris, and they find some oil slicks. They launched the Wood Rush Coast Guard cutter that was in Duluth, and a few other vessels and other non-Coast Guard ships also respond, but they don't find anything. News gets out, and eventually there is an investigation. There's obviously an investigation, and there are people there's this one guy, I think his name's Race, who is employed by the management company for the Edmund Fitzgerald to investigate what happened at 6 Fathom Shoal. He has a non-disclosure agreement with them. It doesn't come out. And then the interesting is, all of the information that was maintained by the company about the Edmund Fitzgerald is missing. It goes missing. Everything else, they have a bankruptcy, and there's a purchase of the company, and they're trying to consolidate their documents, their files, and the one box of file, or there's three, I guess, three boxes of files missing are all about the Edmund Fitzgerald. That's a little suspicious. Eventually, we find out, and I thought this was really interesting, and I'll go over my theory, which is only based off what I read here, but there's maybe I shouldn't even give a theory. I'm gonna say what I think, but it's just kind of what I could see happening, and it's just based off of what wouldn't be surprising. There is some of the maroon reddish paint from the Edmund Fitzgerald, which is found scraped on rocks at 6 Fathom Shoal. My thought, and John Bacon does provide a number of different scenarios that may have happened, are they found the ship. It's split in two. The aft portion is upside down. There is a space in between them. The forward portion, the bow end of it, is sitting upright. Some people think, well, maybe the three large cargo holds, if those cargo hold covers were somehow damaged, they could immediately let in a lot of water, because there's not a whole lot of freeboard, and water is pretty much flowing right over the deck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. It could fill up those cargo holds quickly and sink, especially because of the reduced stability. There's also the idea that maybe water got in through the vents, and I don't agree with that. There's the idea that maybe it was just so extreme that it cracked the hull, just went to the extreme, and maybe a rogue wave took it out. I think that based off of what John Bacon talks about, that it wouldn't be surprising if they lost radar and got caught up in the storm and the navigation, and because they didn't have radar, maybe they didn't realize they didn't have radar because there's not a whole lot of stuff to shoot that far out, they got closer to Caribou Island and therefore closer to the 6 Fathom Shoals than they realized, and ran aground. And in running aground, did something to the hull, and that damage, whatever they did to the hull, eventually allowed water to come in, created the list, and they were still able to move forward, but they didn't have alarms to alert them that there was water collecting in the holds or in the different spaces along the hull. And eventually that list became greater and greater, reduced the stability. They're still taking seas from their starboard side, and at some point that list became too much, and maybe they took some rough waves and just couldn't recover because of the roll and the reduced stability because of the list. Maybe they just took on so much water, and it was so quick that the hatch covers, they figured out the hatch covers were still on there, so it wasn't a hatch being destroyed. Could it have been other things? Maybe, but this is an experienced crew and an experienced captain, and if they had a lot of time to think that they were going to have to abandon ship, that there was going to be a major problem, they would have been wearing things like life jackets, and they would have had maybe the lifeboats prepared. One of the lifeboats was destroyed just because of the weather. One of the lifeboats on the Arthur Anderson was also crushed because of the sheer power of the seas. That's what I think. That's what I think just from reading, especially when he talked about the paint and the scraping on 6 Fathom Shoal. This is not what you would think of from watching movies where it's just like, this thing's getting pounded. It's up and down 30 feet, and it's so long that if it hits, it's going to produce some damage, and that's what I think. The bodies are still on the ship. Eventually, they were able to recover the bell, which took a lot of time for the families to decide that they were okay with recovering the bell, and they went to a museum and they replaced that bell with a bell that had all the crew members' names on it to memorialize them. Eventually, the families worked with the government of Canada, because this is just over the border with Canada, to make it a burial location, so it can't be, people can't dive on it or take anything from it without permission from the families and the government. There's a lot in here John Bacon gives about the families and the friends. He talks to a lot of people that were associated with either the Fitzgerald or other ships or other aspects of the route that they would take, especially in 1975. Friends and family of the crew members involved. I think one of the things that's really helpful is he also, probably the first, I don't know, quarter of the book, talks about the situation, the industry, where we were with the United States, where we were with shipping on the Great Lakes, how shipping is thought of on the Great Lakes, the conditions the Great Lakes sailors deal with, the kind of materials that they're hauling, where they go, what they're a part of, either making cars, making different kinds of metal that are used in other ways, just the kind of the Renaissance or the post World War II growth of industry and some of these cities that became at one point huge, incredibly successful areas, which now have either gone the opposite direction or have had a renaissance, kind of like Pittsburgh, where those major industries have changed, but they've found a way to move on with other ways of being a successful city. He gives you a lot of that background of the environment and the kind of people in the industry, the ships, past disasters, to really kind of, I think by the time you get to what's going on with the Edmund Fitzgerald, and there was a moment where I'm like, come on, please, what happens to the Edmund Fitzgerald? By the time you get there, you're like, okay, I know how things are set up here. And yeah, so I really enjoyed the book. I'm glad I finally read something about the Edmund Fitzgerald. I started this video off with a song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot. I only played the very beginning of it. I'll play the rest of it at the end of this video. I got a picture with John Bacon, and I recorded some of what he was talking about. So here's the picture. And I will include it's a few minutes of him talking, so I just want to provide that.
It's all going to collide right over Whitefish Bay, right in front of Whitefish Bay. We got a catcher setting up in front of home plate. So that's your problem. He knows on the way out it's going to be a rough trip at some point, 3 or 4 hours into it. So he decides to do something he never did. He was the most aggressive captain on the Great Lakes, the best in rough weather, also the best pilot, everyone said. One guy described one of his former cadets. He said, I've seen that man park 729 feet of steel, right, between 2 gigantic ships with 3 feet on either side and not touch anything as though he's backing up his pickup truck. Right, that's how good this guy is. So, and they all respected him. They followed him from ship to ship. Great loyalty. So he's a very hard driving captain. But on this day, he decides not to be. Maybe because it's his last trip. Maybe because he knows the storm is going to be serious. Instead of going straight across Lake Superior the fast way, he takes the northern route. That's like this, hugging the shore the whole way around, mostly Canada. All right, why do that? Because you get the lee of the land, less wind, fewer, smaller waves, all that. But it comes with 3 catches. 1, if you do this way, it's pay me now or pay me later. So if you go this way, the first 2 legs are much better than going straight across. The last leg will not be. This is when 350 miles of fetch, right, the distance of Lake Superior, starts coming in. Those waves get bigger and bigger as they cross the lake, naturally with the wind. So that's one problem. I know Tim's an experienced sailor, and he's nutting at that too. So and on the way down, you'll be going broadside. You'll be going straight down, and waves hitting you broadside is the scariest for a captain. You think it's the worst, crashing through the waves. It's not for them. It's very loud, it's very destructive, but it's not scary for those guys. It's broadside. Because now you're doing this, and now you can have a chance of being capsized or pinned down by a big wave. So that's going to be a hard leg, that last one. Second problem is it takes 14 hours longer to go this way than to go this way. Why does that matter? He doesn't realize it. He doesn't really know it. Right? He just gave the storm a 14-hour head start to get to Whitefish Bay before he does. So the catcher's there first, the ball comes in, if you will, and there you are. Third problem is he does not know this route nearly as well. He's an aggressive captain. They do this trip 50 times a year, or 100 if it's round trip. Right? He's done it he's been a captain for 32 years. He has done this thousands of times. He's taken the northern route, maybe a handful. Right? Why does that matter? Caribou Island. It's an ugly little spit of land, 1 by 3 miles. There are no caribou there, only swamps and bugs. Don't go. All right? There's nothing there to see. but it's right in the middle of Lake Superior on the northeast corner. He knows about it, certainly, but how well does he know it? And in front of that is something called a 6 fathoms shoal. A fathom is 6 feet, so therefore that should be 36 feet, but even that's false advertising. In some places it's 11, and that's no deeper than your backyard pool. This ship drafts 29 feet on a good day, so you should have no business coming anywhere near this. This is not a good day. This is 20, 30 foot waves. All right, so that's going to be a perilous point. What happens in the meantime with the storm is long radar is knocked out, your short radar is knocked out, the lighthouse at Whitefish Point, the one you're dying to see, the oldest in the Great Lakes, the light goes out and the radio beacon goes out. You are now sailing blind. All you have are your paper charts, what we call maps. And you recall the old AAA triptychs, and how you go from one to the other, and you know how you screw that up? You've turned the page too soon, and now nothing makes sense. All right? One of my captains speculated that he might have turned the page too soon. If you do that, the scale changes from where you are in the northeast corner to Whitefish Bay, because he wants to get Whitefish Bay on the map. So if you do that too soon, you lose Caribou Island. He might have thought he already passed it. All right? And then the Anderson sees it go straight over 6 fathoms shoal. So there's a problem.
So
Yeah, but I 5 stars. Like, it was just really interesting. Not all the questions have been answered, but I do feel like I have a greater respect for what happens on the Great Lakes, and especially the gales of November and what happened with the Edmund Fitzgerald. So that's it. Thanks for being here. Listen to the song. The song is the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. It's taken from a Newsweek story and an AP story. It's really, some of the exact words from those articles are included in this. He also even talks about the song and just how this was something that was bouncing around in Gordon Lightfoot's head. It's the one that we listened to. The one that you're going to hear is the first take they ever had, that they played it all together. They knew about it, and they just happened to record it right at the end of a recording session for a record that they were producing. Gordon was hesitant because he didn't want it to seem like he was trying to profit off of it, and he knew that it was a very sensitive thing for people who had lost their husbands, or it was all males that were lost in the Edmund Fitzgerald, their husbands, their sons, their fathers. I think they do it right, and it is a haunting song, and John Bacon does talk about that process of making the song and making sure that the families and friends and everyone were okay with it. And they weren't all initially okay with it, but when it became clear that Gordon was trying to do the right thing and was really trying to pay homage to the most famous ship on the Great Lakes and it being lost, I think when you listen to it, you'll be like, it's all right. It's okay. There's no flair. It is a sad song and one for remembering a lost crew of real humans on November 10th and 11th, 1975. Thanks. Have a good one. Bye.
The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Gitchagumi. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. With a load of iron ore, 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. That good ship and true was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November came early. The ship was the pride of the American side, coming back from some mill in Wisconsin. As the big freighters go, it was bigger than most, with a crew and good captain well seasoned, concluding some terms with a couple of steel firms when they left fully loaded for Cleveland. Then later that night when the ship's bell rang, could it be the north wind they'd been feeling? wind in the wires made a tattletale sound, and the wave broke over the railing. And every man knew, as the captain did too, 'twas the witch of November come stealing. The dawn came late and the breakfast had to wait, when the gales of November came slashing. When afternoon came, it was freezing rain in the face of a hurricane west wind. When supper time came, the old cook came on deck saying, "Fellas, it's too rough to feed you." At 7 p.m. a main hatchway caved in. He said, "Fellas, it's been good to know ya." The captain wired in, he had water coming in, and the good ship and crew was in peril. And later that night, when his lights went out of sight, came the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? The searchers all say they'd have made Whitefish Bay if they'd put 15 more miles behind her. They might have split up or they might have capsized. They may have broke deep and took water. And all that remains is the faces and the names of the wives and the sons and the daughters. Lake Huron rolls Superior sings in the rooms of her ice-water mansion. Old Michigan steams like a young man's dreams. The islands and bays are for sportsmen. And farther below, Lake Ontario takes in what Lake Erie can send her. And the iron boats go, as the mariners all know, with the gales of November remembered. In a musty old hall in Detroit, they prayed in the Maritime Sailors' Cathedral. The church bell chimed till it rang 29 times for each man on the Edmund Fitzgerald. And the legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Gitchagumi. Superior, they said, never gives up her dead when the gales of November come early.